So thanks for coming along tonight, folks, on a Monday night where Michael Kirby makes a welcome return to the Sydney Institute. He was here recently co-launching Anne Henderson's book on Menzies and Evatt, the great Australian political conflict, and with John Howard, and tonight he's here on his own. And he's been here many times before and he's always welcome. So he doesn't need an introduction apart from saying that, of course, the Honourable Michael Kirby, AC, a former judge of the High Court of Australia, who's been very busy in his sort of retirement. But tonight he's going to speak for the Institute on the Commonwealth of Nations, from allegiance to Commonwealth Charter values. Michael Kirby, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerard, and thank you for being here tonight for this talk of mine. I bend down to find the Charter of the Commonwealth, and I will be explaining what it says, how it came about, and what its significance may be in the future. Now, as Gerard has mentioned, I was here in this institute a few weeks back launching a really excellent book by Anne Henderson on Menzies versus Evatt. And it's relevant to this occasion because the issues which I'm going to describe really arose out of events that were happening in that extremely busy time at the end of the Second World War, the explosion of the nuclear bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the establishment of the United Nations at the conference in San Francisco in 1945, with a new president of the United States, President Truman, there to finish the work that Franklin Delano Roosevelt had intended to do before his death. At that time, the world was exhausted. The British Empire was exhausted. The war had concluded. The Allies had won. But it was a time of enormous change. And the change extended to the British Commonwealth, as it was then called. That was the Commonwealth of Nations before it became known as the Commonwealth of Nations. Please do not call it the British Commonwealth. That is a mistake. The British Commonwealth finished 4 years after the heady events in 1945, and it was replaced by the Commonwealth of Nations. In 1945, there was a fulfillment of the promise that the United Kingdom had given to the people of India after the decision which led to the termination of British rule over India. The jewel in the crown was lost, at least lost to allegiance of the king, and allegiance had been up to that time the real foundation of the binding glue that bound the British Empire together. But when, following the election that turned India from an empire into a nation in the Commonwealth, and Jawaharlal Nehru was elected to be the Prime Minister of India, he made it clear that allegiance to the king would not be acceptable to the newly independent nation, and as a result of that, it looked as if India would leave the Commonwealth, or leave the British Empire. However, two people from Australia who had played an extremely important part in the negotiations that led to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, and to the steps that were about to unfold in 1949 were Mr. Ben Chifley, who was the Prime Minister of Australia, having succeeded to Mr. Curtin when he died in office. Ben Chifley was in London, and so was H.V. Evatt. Evatt was a most extraordinary man, and I was reading about his career even this morning, relating to his role in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. He took part in the negotiations for the Charter, and he took an extremely active part in the negotiations that led to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We're all going to hear a lot about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in the next few months, because on the 10th of December this year we'll be celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And that was a significant achievement of Evatt, and all of this and more is told in this excellent book by the lady of the house and of the Institute, Anne Henderson. But she doesn't specifically cover the issues of the Commonwealth and of the fading British Empire, though I think she was not unhappy about the fading part of the British Empire, but this is what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about how the British and the Empire coped with the change in the status of India and what they did about it. It did look as if the Indians would depart the empire, and that they would not accept the normal basis at the Prime Minister's Commonwealth, the Commonwealth Prime Minister's Conference, which was convened in London. But at that conference, Mr. Chifley, in consultation with Dr. Evatt, joined with Clement Attlee, the Labour Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, in suggesting a new and different foundation for the British Empire, given that India was not willing to continue the old relationship of allegiance to the king. And accordingly, Mr. Chifley suggested, and Mr. Attlee agreed, and ultimately Jawaharlal Nehru agreed, that in the future the new Indian Republic would become a member of the Commonwealth of Nations, and that would not involve allegiance to the king, but to the Commonwealth, which the king, as monarch of the United Kingdom, would as such become the head of the Commonwealth, and that would be a new status, a new relationship. And as Mr. Chifley said, monarchy is a handy constitutional fiction for the purpose of resolving this particular problem and perhaps other problems. And accordingly, as such, that is to say, as the King of the United Kingdom became the head of the Commonwealth. And King George VI said at the time, well, I'm very glad you Prime Ministers have been able to find a solution to this, and I just have to be content with being as such, because that was the relationship that was stamped on the future conduct of affairs of the Commonwealth countries, which wanted to become republics. And as time evolved, that was the majority. The great majority of the countries of the old British Empire became members of the Commonwealth, but republics after a short but decent interval, and they accepted the King, the monarch of the United Kingdom, subsequently Queen Elizabeth, as such, to be the head of the Commonwealth. In 2018, at the last Commonwealth conference that Queen Elizabeth presided at in London, the decision that was made was that Prince Charles, as he was then, would become the next head of the Commonwealth. She expressed her sincere wish that her son and heir would become her successor as head of the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth leaders at Buckingham Palace agreed to that, and that was therefore the pathway for the accession of King Charles. And as such, he became the head of the Commonwealth, and that is a role that he holds to this day. Now, this is the background to the felt need at the Commonwealth Prime Minister's Conference to have a new and different basis in the relationship. The Commonwealth of Nations that was created is a remarkable institution because it brings countries together that, when it's analysed, are bound together by their history of relationship with Great Britain during the times of empire. A few other countries have slipped in more recently, but overwhelmingly, of the 59 countries of the Commonwealth, I think it's 56 were members of the old British Empire, and they attend regular meetings, which is graced by the monarch of the United Kingdom, and that is how the Commonwealth is now established. And a number of conferences, so-called CHOGM Conference, Commonwealth Heads of Government Conference, have taken place in every second year normally during the period since the 1949 meeting, the last meeting of Commonwealth Prime Ministers. And the result of those conferences has been to have a series of statements at the end of the conference setting out what are called the principles of the meeting that has been held. And that set of principles became a foundation for building on the values of the Commonwealth. What was the value? Once you abandoned allegiance to the monarch, what was the value that kept the Commonwealth together? And in a series of statements, starting with a conference of CHOGM in Singapore in 1971, the Commonwealth adopted a long series of statements which contained principles, but it wasn't very well organised. It was just a statement at the end of a conference and therefore not easy to find. So in 2009 at Trinidad, a CHOGM meeting was held, and at that meeting it was determined that the Secretary-General should establish an expert body for the purpose of advising on what are the values of the Commonwealth. And the Secretary-General of the time, Kamalesh Sharma, an Indian diplomat, agreed to establish and followed the resolution to establish the Eminent Persons Group, as it became known. And I was appointed to the Eminent Persons Group in 2010. I was one of the 12 members of the Eminent Persons Group. It included Sir Malcolm Rifkind, the past Secretary of State in the United Kingdom, the Foreign Minister of the UK, and other members of distinction from different Commonwealth countries and myself. And we had our first meeting in London in 2010, and that meeting took place in the official residence of the Secretary-General. And after a very nice meal together, we sat down and there was a general conversation of people at the table. This is the way things develop in international law. We then repaired to a drawing room where we sat down, and the Secretary-General asked the President or the Chairman of the Eminent Persons Group, who was Tun Abdullah Badawi, the former Prime Minister of Malaysia, whether he had any thoughts as the chairman, designated chairman of the Eminent Persons Group, the EPG, whether he had any thoughts as to what should be done. And Tun Abdullah Badawi, as chance would have it, had been Prime Minister of Malaysia when ASEAN was established, the Association of Southeast Asian Countries. And he took an active part in formulating the statement of the organisational structure of ASEAN, and that was essentially the source of his contribution. He said, well, we should sit down and we should prepare a constitution. The United Nations organisation has the Charter. ASEAN has its foundation document, a charter, and we should establish a charter of the Commonwealth which sets out what are the institutions of the Commonwealth, how members can be accepted into or expelled from the Commonwealth, and what should be done to ensure that it was a successful organisation with, under the rule of law, a statement of how it went about its business. There was a long silence after Tun Abdullah Badawi suggested this, because many members of the table thought that the reason for the success of the Commonwealth was largely its very flexible organisational structure and the fact that there weren't the kinds of detailed provisions as are found in the Charter of the United Nations, and that was a good aspect of the Commonwealth and it should be left as such. However, out of little gifts arise bigger gifts, because we thought there should be a charter, but it should be a charter of a different kind. And that idea was quickly adopted, that it would be a charter that would draw upon all the previous statements of the Commonwealth Heads of Government conferences, and that should be available as a foundation, a new foundation for the Commonwealth of Nations. That was accepted by the members of the Eminent Persons Group. It became the source of the preparation of the Charter, and we sat together and we, in our very first meeting in London, we agreed there should be a charter, and that became one of the key suggestions. A second key suggestion was there should be a commissioner of human rights and of the rule of law and the principles of the Commonwealth, and that this person, independent of the Secretary-General, should have a responsibility to try to ensure that the Charter was turned from a statement of principle into something that would be obeyed or at least respected and given attention. And this is what was decided at the first meeting, and thereafter at subsequent meetings it was decided that there would be a charter, but that it was too difficult and we just didn't have enough time, because we had to get our report to the next CHOGM meeting, which had switched from Colombo in Sri Lanka to Perth in Western Australia, and we therefore had to move with some speed. So effectively, to prepare the Eminent Persons Group report, we adopted the principle of the Charter, but we didn't really set to work on what such a charter would include. At the end of the second meeting, I said to my colleagues, if we don't decide on the broad terms of the Charter of the Commonwealth, it'll just go into Sir Humphrey's bottom drawer. I'd had enough experience in a number of United Nations bodies and in the OECD to realise that if you want to get any progress in this world, you've got to have a piece of paper that has the ideas on it. V.I. Lenin, who was very clever about creating institutions and structures, once said that the enemy to action is the blank page. And therefore, we decided that we should think about what was contained in the Charter. And I said, well, I'm going back to Australia on a very long trip, leave it to me. And I therefore had to go to Colombo myself to receive an honorary degree. And on the way, I was in part of the way on a Qantas jet. I kept calling for paper napkins because I didn't have any paper that I had to prepare my draft of the Charter. And Qantas was very obliging, kept providing me with paper napkins, and I just sat down and wrote out what I thought would be a good structure of the Charter, and I drew upon the successive statements of principle of the heads of the Commonwealth at the CHOGM meeting. So it wasn't something that just came out of my head, but the organisation, language, poetry of the Charter came out of my head, and I sent it, I brought it back to Sydney. My secretary, Sarah Conquest, deciphered my handwriting and translated it into a document, and the document was sent around to the members of the Eminent Persons Group. They were astonished by my document and thought it very good. But in terms of principle, they couldn't attach it for the purpose of it being put forward as the draft Charter of the Commonwealth, because it hadn't been fully discussed and hadn't been the subject of consultations within the Commonwealth, which we certainly thought should happen. The net result of all this was that the members of the EPG decided that they would annex my draft to their report as an indication not of a draft charter, but of what a charter might look like, so that the heads of government could have a good look at it and see whether they were so shocked and horrified that they wouldn't do anything about it. But in the result, the charter which I had drafted was put in this document, the Eminent Persons Group report, and is annexed as a document to the report, and the report makes it clear that the document came from me, not from the EPG. But why did they put it in their report? They put it in their report in order to hasten the progress, and that is what happened. The Eminent Persons Group report was on the table at the Perth CHOGM. I went to the Perth CHOGM, as did all the members of the EPG, and when we arrived there, we found that the report, although completed by us with great efficiency and hard work on time, was not being distributed. And the question arose, what should we do about this? They said they didn't have the authority, that's the Secretariat said, we didn't have the authority to distribute it. And Sir Malcolm Rifkind, who had dealt with people before, decided that it should be distributed, and he immediately distributed his copy to the media in Perth, and very soon after the official copy was distributed, and it was considered by the Perth CHOGM. The CHOGM essentially agreed to most of the proposals of the eminent persons group. Most of them have nothing to do with the basic rights of members of people of the Commonwealth, but the EPG liked the idea of a charter. And to that extent, annexing a document had been strategically a good one for the EPG. They did not like the idea of a commissioner who might embarrass them or criticise them or persuade others to criticise them, and accordingly, when they made their resolution at the end of the EPG meeting, they said that there should be a charter, but there should not be a Commissioner of Human Rights. During the debate on that, the Secretary-General, although he hadn't indicated this to the EPG, said he didn't see why it couldn't be done by the Secretary-General and not a Commissioner. That would have monetary advantages, but the problem is that the Secretary-General is a politico. He's a person who has to deal all the time with politicians and is not so easily put in a position of criticising them. We were allowed to come into the meeting of CHOGM during the discussion of our report, and during that discussion this question of whether the commissioner should be established came up, and most of the commissioners, most of the members of the conference, the heads of government, said, well, we don't see why this should be done. But there was one head of government who was a former president and now a restored president of the Maldives. His name was Mohammed Rashid. And Mohammed, the other colleagues said, well, we don't need this. The Secretary-General can do this. And Rashid said in a booming voice to the embarrassment of everybody, well, when I was deposed, I wrote to the Secretary-General, I wrote repeatedly to the Secretary-General, and I never got a reply. Perhaps if there had been a commissioner, I would at least have had a reply. I might even have had some action. And the result of that was that the cat was put amongst the pigeons, but the cat was immediately withdrawn. The commissioner was not adopted, and the net result was that the charter went forward without the commissioner. Now, the contents of the charter are pretty similar to many of the provisions in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that's how all of this fits together in the post-war period. There is a provision, we are committed to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other relevant human rights and international instruments, committed to equality. That was an important principle. And likewise, tolerance, respect and understanding. We emphasise the need to promote tolerance, respect, understanding, moderation. We accept that diversity and understanding the richness of our multiple identities are fundamental to the Commonwealth principles and approach. Throughout the document, there were many statements which spoke to those who had been the subject of disadvantage and discrimination, including in Commonwealth countries and including during times of empire and after times of empire. And the result of that was that the Charter began to speak to those minorities. One of them was the minority who were oppressed by the laws in many Commonwealth countries against LGBT people. And that oppression had very bad consequences for the response of many Commonwealth countries to the HIV/AIDS pandemic, which had first fallen upon that minority. And this was brought home to the CHOGM, but it didn't lead to a specific decision to urge countries to get rid of their laws against gay people, and that was not affected directly, but it was affected by the Charter, because the Charter said we believe in equality, we are implacably opposed to discrimination of any kind, and those statements began to haunt the halls of the Commonwealth, and that was a very good thing. And subsequently, in meetings that have been held since 2011, 2012, the action in the Commonwealth on the issues of LGBT rights has been variable but quite significant. In 2022, Antigua and Barbuda. 2022, Barbados and St Kitts and Nevis. Singapore in 2022, Sri Lanka in 2023, Kenya in 2023 in respect of an agreement to permit a group to run for election to amend those laws, and Mauritius as recently as last week in an important decision which was actually sent to me by someone in this audience, Ron Heinrich, who had been president of the Commonwealth Law Association. It was a very strong judicial decision, and most important of all, perhaps, in 2019, the Supreme Court of India unanimously held that the provision in the Indian Penal Code penalising gay people was incompatible with the principles of the Indian Constitution. So there it is. There is now a document which is designed to put the focus and the spotlight on human rights and rights to dignity and to non-discrimination on the table of the Commonwealth. It's not a perfect document, and it's not universally respected. Uganda, as you may have heard, introduced a law this year which incorporates new punishments for LGBT people, including for so-called aggravated homosexuality, the punishment of death. It restores the punishment of death for that sort of case. So the challenge now is to try to make sure that the principles of the Charter are more than lip service, are more than just a document. Without a commissioner, it's not easy, but at least the principles are there, and they're increasingly referred to in Commonwealth meetings and in the actions of academics and others, and some politicians dealing with the issues of minorities within Commonwealth countries. The proof of this brought home to me in May of this year, when there was on Commonwealth Day the usual service at Westminster Abbey. The King came to the service, the Secretary-General of the Commonwealth came to the service. The service included people from every Commonwealth country, and there was an affirmation of the Commonwealth in terms of the Charter, and it was pronounced, and everybody, including the Secretary-General, Baroness Scotland, who hadn't always been a supporter of this, had to lead the service in the promise that the principles of the Charter will be adopted. The King, for the first time at a Commonwealth Day conference, invited everyone to Buckingham Palace. And this was a good thing that people were taken in there, because you realised as you go into Buckingham Palace, as I realised when I delivered the EPG report with my colleagues to the late Queen, really how the Queen was like a prisoner. The place imposes a prison-like discipline and security, but the King had everybody there, and the security was low, and the occasion was a happy one, and we have to hope that out of a commitment to this document that there is going to be progress in human rights for all people, not just LGBT people. That was one group that I knew of, but there are many minorities, because minorities are usually on the receiving end of abuses of human rights, and it's valuable to have a document. And through the paper napkins on the Qantas jet, a document was given, and that led to the Charter. And that document is a good start to a more effective commitment by the Commonwealth of Nations to universal human rights in its member countries, some of whom have been in the past not particularly observant of those principles. So that is what I've come to tell you. It's an interesting story. You'll be pleased to know that I handed the paper napkins over to the Secretary-General of the Commonwealth to keep in the archives of the Commonwealth. And I don't know what he did with them, but I hope that they were put into the archives and will one day be seen by a PhD student who will prepare a document comparing the Charter as it became and my draft of it. Are there any questions on what I've just said? Yes. You seem very definite about your rights.
Yes, I am.
And now, can I make a complaint?
Yes.
On the document that was sent out for this occasion, there is a reference to my office as a Companion of the Order of Australia, of which I am naturally inordinately proud. It's an office that came with my appointment to the High Court of Australia. But as you and as Anne know, I am also a Companion of the Order of St Michael and St George, which is relevant to this occasion because it was the last such imperial honour that was given in Australia at the end of Malcolm Fraser's term, and I'm rather proud of that too. So in future, if I'm ever invited again, please overcome your Republican tendencies and include Companion of the Order of Australia in my honorifics.
You see, no, don't go. No, got to come back. We're going to do questions. You've got to stay here. I think Anne and I can manage that. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think St Michael and St George were probably saints before the Protestant Reformation, weren't they? So they'll be in. They'll be there. Thanks for a very, very important talk, and someone who's obviously very influential. I thought you were going to tell us that you wrote all this in the Qantas Chairman's Lounge, but what might have been tainted. So come back here and we'll start questions. So just on a slightly different, moving a little bit away, not very much, but how the Commonwealth of Nations is seen. I mean, when the Victorian government dropped the Commonwealth Games, there was a view among a lot of commentators, well, they don't really matter much. But Walid Ali, who wrote an interesting column in the Sydney Morning Herald about it, he said, well, they do. He said for certain nations, smaller nations, they are very important events and they bring us all together. How do you look at that? I mean, it's not quite on your topic, but how do you look at the Commonwealth Games?
Yes, well, I don't want to get into a political stouch, but the fact is that the Commonwealth Games are one of many organisations that bring civil society and ordinary folks together, not just politicians and leaders and so on. it's a misfortune, I think, that was not pursued, especially after there had been advice and the decision had been made. And I don't know if an announcement has been made that some other country will come to the plate, but it's unfortunate because it's the sort of thing that brings joy to people. And this is the object of the Commonwealth. It's fundamentally a civil society organisation writ large. And in the past, the role of the Queen was very important in it. All of the heads of government, Republican or not, were happy to be seen with the Queen. And I think it's going to be the same with the King, whose behaviour and in insisting that there be an affirmation of the Charter and that it be more than a political organisation. When Mr. Putin compares the various groupings of nations based on history, Francophonie and the French nations, the Lusophone countries, the Portuguese Empire, and his own Russian Commonwealth of independent states, so-called independent states, he has commented, and others have commented, on how strange in a way it is that the Commonwealth of Nations, which rose out of an empire, is not only surviving, but is still producing documents of principle and has a secretariat that does a whole large range of activities, one of which is the Commonwealth Games, but also Commonwealth universities, Commonwealth food and humanitarian aid, and many other activities of the Commonwealth, which perhaps Ron Heinrich can speak on if there is time.
So we have questions, comments?
Michael, the Charter will be important, and we've seen it. You've explained how it was set up. What do you see are the areas that it will concentrate on in terms of rights, and how might it be influential? What would be the processes?
Well, it would have been more directly important and implemented more quickly if there had been a commissioner. In fact, a commissioner is a kind of insurance to the Secretary-General that things can be done which don't touch the political part of the organisation, but are nevertheless done, and are done publicly and criticised. It's the same in the United Nations. There is a Secretary-General who is very obviously, and always has been, a highly political office. But there is also a High Commissioner for Human Rights. I've known most of them. I don't know the current High Commissioner, Mr. Turk. He was a very quiet person with a background as a diplomat and official, like Mr. Sharma. Such people don't tend to be very aggressive about human rights. But he turned up after the Uganda legislation in the General Assembly of the United Nations and said that this legislation was probably the worst in the world. So it got even a cautious diplomat to speak out. And that's what you've got to do. You've got to provide machinery that those with political power can do things, but those, when they don't do the right thing, they can be criticised by reference to some principles. And that was the main objective of turning Tun Badawi's idea of a sort of Charter of the United Nations into a document which didn't deal with the infrastructure and the organisation of the Commonwealth, but dealt with the rights of people. The Charter is made in the name of the people of the Commonwealth, and that, I think, is also a strength of the form of the document.
So I've got a question here from Canberra. How much modern human rights thinking is influenced and relates to your talk by also the Nuremberg and the Tokyo trials, war crime trials? Does that influence the Charter or the UN Charter or the ASEAN Charter?
I think the Tokyo war crimes trial is a different kettle of fish to the Nuremberg war crimes trial. There were some people at the end of the Second World War, including Stalin, and it was reputed at one stage Churchill, who thought that what should be done is to put the Nazi presses up against a wall and shoot them. Don't worry about the niceties of a trial. But wiser heads prevailed, and the Americans insisted on the Nuremberg trials, and in fact a justice of the Supreme Court of the United States stood down for a time to be the chief prosecutor. And I think everybody observing the trial, as we can do from time to time on YouTube and on the television, and seeing those horrible oppressors brought before the international community and rendered accountable. This is what, in our work on North Korea, we have been trying to do, to render accountable tyrants. And it's better to render them accountable in a trial process or some public process than just to make an accusation and never have it followed up.
You spoke some years ago about your report on North Korea, and I think you're a bit disappointed that the UN hadn't published it in a printed form, but it was influential. So what's happened there in the years since? Not that many years since, is it?
Thank you for that question. In fact, it's timely because this is the 10th anniversary of the report of the Commission of Inquiry. And my criticism of the UN stands. The reason why the report of the Commission of Inquiry on North Korea was not published in a book form that could be purchased at airports and so on is that the United Nations is strapped for cash. Various countries from time to time walk out and don't pay their dues. And the result of that is that it's on the internet, it can be accessed. A lot of people do access it on the internet. And now, on the 10th anniversary, we're having a series of conference. I'm going to 2 of them. I went to one earlier this year. I'm going to 2 of them, which will be held in Seoul in Korea. And of course, to the human rights assaults and deprivations that we described in our report, there must now be added the terrible problem of the nuclear weapons and the rocket system. The Korean people are very, very clever. They're very clever in mathematics. They are very clever in science. And the North Koreans have the same features. Their education system must be very strong because they have developed, in the South, they developed mobile phones and other such digital technology. In the North, they've developed nuclear weapons and missiles that can deliver them over huge distances. So if only they could secure the end to the human rights violations that were described in the report and get their act together and turn away from the division of the Korean Peninsula, which was never decided by the Korean people, but was imposed upon them by the allies, successful allies in the Second World War. If only that could happen, Korea would be a mighty economic power and a very important and beneficial member of the international community. But it will take a few steps, and we've got to wait and hope that those steps occur.
Just before we come to the next question there, the division across the parallel north and south, but that was primarily because of the concern that the communist regime in the north wasn't going to ever have an election and was going to take over the whole of Korea, in which case you would have had the whole of Korea with very smart people, not just half of it.
That isn't the way the time sequence unfolded. The war was coming quickly to its end. the Soviet Russia had not played a very active part at all in the war against Japan, but at the very last minute, the European war having concluded, they suddenly became extremely active in the Asian theatre of war, and that was a factor that led the Allies at the Cairo conference to decide that Korea should be divided. And we now know through access to the Soviet secret archives, which occurred under Mr. Yeltsin, you can get a whole raft of information on such questions. We know that nobody was more astonished by the American statement that, well, you'll take responsibility in the North than Stalin. He had not expected this, but that's what happened in Cairo. And I think it was through unthinking decisions of the United States in the hope that the United States and the Soviet Union would continue their good relationship, but they didn't. And we're now stuck, and the Korean people are stuck with this division. And it's a great misfortune, and it divides a people with a language, a culture. It's like as if our country had been divided at the Brisbane line and kept divided. It's an obsessional challenge to people in Korea from the north and from the south. And it's unfinished business of the Second World War.
On the subject of the Commonwealth Charter of Rights, is there a role for it to play in the Belt and Road Initiative of China being spread into the Pacific Island nations that are members of the Commonwealth, thinking specifically perhaps of Chinese security forces being, as a result of that, finding themselves there and carrying out activities that might be not in keeping with that Charter of Rights? Would there be a role for it to play in those circumstances?
Well, you would not be surprised to know that the belt and braces policy of the People's Republic of China is not of the generality that the Charter is dealing with. The Charter is stating very broad principles, and it doesn't get down in any of those principles to dealing with geopolitics. And I think that's a reason why the Commonwealth has, on the whole, succeeded, that it's one organisation, unlike the other great meetings of nations, that has focused on things where people can agree, and now by this charter have expressed things on which they may disagree, but has given an impetus to the disagreement. The right to life and the right to democratic government are reflected in the charter, as they are in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But I don't think it gets down into the engine room of geopolitical arrangements between China and other countries, least of all in the Pacific.
Final question?
Just in the discussions about the charter you've observed, was there any criticisms or reservations, perhaps in relation to national sovereignty expressed?
Well, the Commonwealth is not a body that has intruded much into the political and military sovereignty of countries. But as Mr. Putin has recognised, it's nonetheless a curious thing that something that began as an empire built on political and military power is now such a popular organisation that countries who stand prone to be criticised for their action on matters which are significant to their internal government, nonetheless all want to be a member. And that is curious. Why has it happened? It's happened because of the links of the English language. It's happened because of the links of English institutions. It's happened because of the power of the democratic legislature as a symbol. And it's happened because of the general way in which our legal system, even where we don't have a Bill of Rights, protects people's rights from official intrusion. So these are things that, having had it in part during the days of empire, countries don't apparently want to surrender it and don't want to give it up, and recognise that even when it's criticising them, it is a useful part of their history. And that's the important thing. The empire was part of the history of 57 nations, and they've had many differences and still do, but they still want to be a member of the Commonwealth. And that is a curiosity, and I think the answer is they wouldn't want to be a member of the Commonwealth unless there was something in it for them. And what's in it for them is a body which does very good work in specifics like universities and libraries and institutions of culture, theatre, the Shakespearean tradition and so on. And now it's got this instrument, which is an instrument that is one of principle, human rights principle, which is going to be occasionally embarrassing, but one hopes occasionally stimulating of improvement in the local record when it goes astray.
Many thanks. It's always great to have Michael Kirby at the Honourable Michael Kirby, AC, Order of St Michael and St George. Does that sound for OMG? No, it's CMG. Oh, companion. I had down OMG, which is also, oh my God, it's COMG. We'll get it. It is. It is. I was educated in Melbourne, in a Catholic school. You'll understand my problems. Yeah. Look, it's very rare that individuals in democratic societies have an influence over the political system and the governmental system and the international system. And Michael Kirby is one of them who has with the Charter, which is an extremely important initiative. And it's great that you could come along tonight and talk to us about it, and also some of the other work you've done in relation to career and other places. But you're always welcome here. You're always a great performer, and we'll have you back again. But for tonight, well done and thank you.